He walked slowly, the key a quiet weight in his palm. The rain had begun again, soft and silver on the windows, not storming but speaking. Each drop tapped in rhythm with something rising inside his chest. Not fear, not urgency, something gentler, like memory stretching its limbs after a long sleep. The hall seemed longer tonight, or perhaps the air was thicker, filled with things unsaid. By the time he reached the study, he wasn't sure if his footsteps had grown louder, or if the house had simply hushed to listen. Mrs. Ellery stood at the far end of the corridor, no surprise on her face, no reprimand, just the soft lift of her chin, and the words, spoken barely above the rain, "Be kind to what you find." Michael blinked. "What do you mean?" She shook her head, her hand resting over her heart like someone remembering the feel of an old lullaby. "Not everything left behind wants to haunt you," she said. "Some things only want to be seen." She turned and walked away, and the house, as if in agreement, exhaled. He stood before it now. The desk, the drawer, the hollow space between wanting and knowing. The key slid in easily, as if it had always belonged. It turned with a soft click, and the drawer, it didn't creak or groan. It simply sighed, as though it too had been holding something in for years. Inside, paper, yellowing at the corners, a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon that had long since lost its color, a photograph, blurred with time and thumb-smoothed edges, and beneath it all, a small envelope, sealed, addressed in firm, familiar script. Michael James Holloway. He stepped back, his breath catching. He lifted the first letter. The ink had faded to a soft brown, the paper smelling of cedar and something gentler, old perfume perhaps, or the oil from worn hands. The words weren't grand or literary. They were simple, honest. "To whomever finds this, I don't believe in hauntings, not the kind with chains and shadows, but I believe a house can remember kindness, and I believe a drawer can keep a promise." Another page spoke of a daughter who had passed young, of dreams Julian had written but never shared, of music he played to no audience, except himself. The letters were like pressed flowers, delicate, preserved, imperfect, and impossibly alive. At last he picked up the envelope with his name. Not a coincidence, not misdelivered, not old mail. The ink hadn't aged as the others had. The paper felt newer, not recent, but not forgotten. He turned it over. The seal opened easily, as if it had been closed only lightly, never truly meant to stay shut. Inside, one folded page, his name again. "Then I don't know how you'll come here, only that you will. I've seen your face before, though we've never met. In dreams, in the mirror once, though that sounds mad. You carry something familiar in the way you hesitate before joy. If you've found this, then you've already felt it too. The house recognizing you. Don't be afraid to sit with what aches. It's how you know it still matters. No signature, just a tiny pressed daisy at the bottom, long dried but intact. Its stem curled like a question mark." Michael held the letter in both hands and closed his eyes. The house, the rain, the drawer, everything felt still, but inside him something had shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, only deeply, like a river changing course. Michael sat again at the desk, the drawer open, time unspooling like thread between his fingers. The letter on top was written in ink that had once been blue. Now it had faded into a soft charcoal hue, like breath on a mirror. The handwriting was uneven, the strokes sometimes pressed too hard, other times faint, as though each word had required negotiation between hand and heart. "Michael, I've written this a dozen times. I've burned a few, lost a few. This one I've kept." The paper felt warm in his hands, though the fire had long gone out. "You never knew me, but I knew you. From the first photo your mother sent before she stopped writing. I kept it in a drawer like this one." The page trembled slightly as Michael turned it, or maybe his hands did. He kept reading. Tucked beneath the first page was a stack of old clippings, each carefully cut with patient hands. A second-grade spelling bee, a high school baseball team photo, a college newspaper headline where Michael's name appeared once near the fold. Each clipping had a date scribbled in pencil, and a small circle drawn around Michael's face or name, like a quiet whisper saying, "See, I was there." There were no letters attached to the clippings, just time folded neatly. Michael ran a thumb along the edge of the stack and felt the paper hum. It was faint but there, like holding onto light through a curtain. At the very bottom, beneath a velvet handkerchief, whose scent had faded to faint spice and air, was the tape. Old, square, the kind he hadn't held since boyhood, when voices came on plastic and whirring wheels, and fast-forwarding meant guessing. Written across the label in thin, unsteady cursive, "To my son." The study had no player, but Mrs. Ellery, as always, had known. When he found her in the kitchen, she didn't ask questions, only handed him a small black recorder from the cupboard drawer, the kind that needed 2 thumbs to press play. She nodded once, and he returned to the study, the house holding its breath behind him. He pressed play, and the voice came, at first just static, the kind that lives in between stations, soft as falling snow. Then Michael, a pause, as if the name caught in his throat. "To my son, who never knew me." Michael didn't move, didn't blink. The voice was rough at the edges, worn, careful, the kind of voice that had been quiet too long and wasn't used to being heard. It wavered, sometimes scratched, but never stopped. "I won't explain everything. I don't think I could. I was a coward in some ways, a ghost long before I died. But I want you to know, I saw you." Another pause, longer this time, not in person, never that. "I stayed away for your sake, or so I told myself. But I kept the papers. I lit candles on your birthdays. I whispered your name into every song I played on the piano." Michael closed his eyes. He didn't know this man, but somehow, he did. The voice continued, words slow and softened by age. "Your mother and I, we were young, foolish. I left before I understood how deeply people stay in us. I was afraid I would ruin you, so I stayed gone and ruined myself instead." The voice cracked then, not with weeping, but with something older, something like a floorboard giving way under too much silence. "I didn't raise you, I didn't hold you, but I loved you, quietly, hopelessly, every single day. I hope this drawer gives you more than answers. I hope it gives you back a part of yourself that was never really missing, just sleeping." The tape ended not with a goodbye, but with a breath, a long inhale, and a click. Michael didn't reach for the stop button. He let the silence that followed sit between him and the drawer. The study seemed to listen too. The walls unmoving, the curtains still, the dust pausing mid-air as though waiting. The chair beneath him no longer creaked. The desk no longer felt like wood. They felt like presence. Michael rested both hands on his knees and looked out the rain-washed window. The world hadn't changed, but inside him, something had turned toward light. He didn't cry at first. He sat for a long time, listening again, reading, holding. Then slowly, as though some knot had slipped free from the center of his chest, the tears came. They weren't violent, not the kind that steal breath. These were slow, unhurried, the kind that drip into an old wool sweater and soak the sleeves before you notice. They carried no anger, only recognition and forgiveness, not for the father he didn't know, but for himself, for the years he had spent pretending not to miss something unnamed. It wasn't money, it wasn't secrets, it wasn't even a name. The drawer had held something gentler, a quiet, trembling love that never found its voice until now. Julian had never opened the drawer for himself. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe it needed Michael's hands. Maybe it was waiting for the right moment. The right man, the one who would sit in the same chair, hold the same letter, hear the same voice, and weep not because he was alone, but because finally he wasn't. Michael folded the letters back into the drawer, closed it softly, not to hide it again, but to lay it to rest. Then he sat with his palms on the wood and whispered, "Thank you." The study said nothing in return, but the walls, the chair, the air, they understood. It had been tucked in the back of a drawer in his own house for years, a small wooden compass with no directions marked, only the carved spiral of a fern, where north should have been. Michael had received it at a train station when he was 10, handed to him by a stranger with eyes like an overcast sky, who said nothing, just pressed the object into his palm and walked away. He'd kept it because he liked the weight of it, the mystery. But now, holding it again in the glow of the manor's lamplight, he felt something deeper. He had touched his father's hand once, and never known, and somehow, that small act felt like enough. In the library, the morning's hush had started to filter through the windows. The dust no longer danced. It floated, gently, like it too had grown tired. Michael moved along the shelves slowly, stopping at the books that once caught his eye the first time he visited. One, The Secret Garden. Another, A Field Guide to Stones and Their Songs. And a third, Letters Never Meant to Be Sent. Each held a bookmark, the same neat handwriting in the margins. Simple notes. He'd like this. Strong heart even when scared. Page 63. His kind of quiet. They weren't just books. They were breadcrumbs, planted gently across time, waiting to be found. The sun broke through around mid-morning. The kind of light that didn't shout, but tapped softly at the curtains and poured itself onto the wooden table. Mrs. Ellery was already there, steeping tea in a pot that bore tiny painted violets. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Milk, she offered. Just a little, Michael replied. They drank in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that held room for everything. Grief, wonder, memory, and something close to peace. He loved you, she said at last, still looking at her cup. Even from far, it was not a revelation, it was a lullaby. Mrs. Ellery spoke slowly, her voice shaped by years and softened at the edges like old wool. He used to call me now and then, ask if I thought you were well, if I'd seen your name in the paper. He was afraid, she added after a long pause, but not of you. Her gaze didn't rise to meet his. She let her words rest on the air like petals fallen to the table. He stayed in the background not because he didn't care, but because he cared so much, he didn't trust himself not to ruin it. And Michael, who had spent so long being angry without knowing why, found himself nodding, not because he agreed, but because he understood. Back in the study, one letter lay aside from the others, thinner than the rest, addressed simply, "For the day he knows." Michael folded it into his coat pocket, not to keep it from the world, but to keep it near his ribs. The letter wasn't long. It didn't say much that hadn't already been said on the tape, but it did say his name, Michael, not as a question, not as a whisper, but as something whole, a name carried and returned. He didn't need to read it again. Just knowing it was there was enough. On the corner of the desk stood a small white vase, inside a single daisy. Fresh, impossibly so. He hadn't seen it yesterday. It hadn't been there when he arrived, but there it was now, quiet as breath, its petals clean, unshaken by the dust around it. Michael reached out, unsure, touched one petal with his fingertip. It was real. He didn't ask how, didn't question who had placed it or when. He simply lifted the vase, poured out the water gently into a saucer nearby, and carried the daisy with him. It wasn't rare. It had just stayed. He stood before the desk one last time. The drawer was still open, waiting, not with demand, but with something like relief. Michael didn't take the rest. He left the clippings, the cassettes, the folded truths. They didn't need to travel with him. They belonged to the house, to the drawer, to the man who had tried. Even if too late, with a quiet push, he closed it. The wood whispered as it settled back into its place. Not a slam, not a lock, just rest. As he walked down the hall for the last time, something had shifted. The floors no longer groaned beneath him. The portraits no longer watched. They simply were. The air did not press inward. The house had spoken. He had heard it. At the door, Mrs. Ellery handed him his coat and looked up, her smile soft but sure. "You'll come back?" she asked. Michael looked at her, then past her, toward the stairs, the study, the silent drawer. "Maybe," he said, "but I think part of me already did." Outside, the air was cool, Birds stirred in the hedges, and somewhere behind him, a room closed its eyes. Home was the same, but not quite. The light seemed to fall differently. Not brighter, not warmer, just more there. As if the house had been holding its own breath, waiting for him to return, changed. Michael moved slowly through the rooms, letting his hand brush the edges of doorways and shelves. Not searching, only noticing. Even the rain on his own window now felt different, like it knew him better than before. On his desk, beneath a circle of cool glass, the daisy sat. Its petals hadn't curled. Its stem was still straight. It was never meant to last, and yet it did, like some feelings do. The ones we don't speak aloud, but carry anyway. Beside it, the envelope with Julian's last letter lay unopened, not because he wasn't ready, but because he no longer needed the words to know. Some things don't explain themselves. They linger, like music heard through a closed door, or perfume on an old coat. Michael didn't read the letter that night. He touched it once, let his fingers rest against the fold. That was enough. Sometimes it wasn't the message that changed you. It was knowing someone had tried to say it. The drawer hadn't been a secret. It had been a mirror, waiting for the right light to show what was always inside. It didn't take anything from him. It didn't shout truths or offer conclusions. It just opened and gave him back a part of himself he hadn't known he was missing. There was still quiet in the house, but it no longer rang empty. It held warmth now, like the hush of breath in someone else's arms, like being alone without being lost. Michael didn't fill the space with noise. He simply stood in it, one heartbeat at a time. He stood by the window, one hand resting lightly over his chest, not to shield it, but to hold what he'd found there. The drawer, the letter, the voice, the knowing. It lived inside him now, not as pain, but as place. Some people go without saying goodbye. Some say nothing at all, but love, when real, leaves fingerprints on drawers, on daisy petals, on sons who grow up with quiet questions and finally find quiet answers. Outside, the rain fell like it always had, steady, gentle, patient. It traced lines on the window, like handwriting from the sky. A letter without an envelope. Michael watched. He didn't need to understand it all. He only needed to listen. The past had spoken, and now it was raining. Not to wash anything away, but to let it bloom. The rain had come softly, like breath against a window pane. Outside, the fields curled in fog and silver mist, and the trees leaned close to listen. The manor stood on the edge of the world, or so it felt, cradled in ivy, aging brick, and the hush of something long remembered. Officer Michael Delaney stepped from his car, the soles of his boots touching gravel, as if not to wake the morning. The rain tapped on his shoulders but didn't rush him. It wasn't that kind of rain, it was the kind that waited. The manor loomed ahead, not menacing, but full of echoes, full of air that still knew names no longer spoken aloud. Mrs. Ellery met him at the door, wrapped in a shawl the color of ash and roses. Her voice was soft, like the cloth of her dress or the scent that lingered around her, lavender, and something older, like lemon polish on forgotten wood. "There was a break-in," she said, "but I don't think anything was taken." She paused, looking up at him with eyes that had seen too much silence. "Don't open the drawer in the study." That was all. No explanation. Just a hush behind her words, like a curtain that fluttered even after the window had closed. Michael stepped inside, where the light bent through stained glass panels and danced across velvet chairs no one had sat in for years. The floor creaked under his weight, but not in protest, only as if acknowledging him. There was scents here that hadn't been named in decades. Ink, old paper, orange rind in a drawer. The kind of sense that stirred a memory even if you couldn't say what it was. His footsteps echoed through the hall, not loud, but alone, as though someone were listening 2 rooms away. The walls held time in wooden frames, faded photographs, oil paintings where the colors had learned to whisper, children in sailor coats, a woman standing beside a piano, a man with a gaze too far away to reach. Michael paused by one. The glass was cracked near the edge, as if the picture had once fallen, but someone had picked it up again, gently, and returned it to its place. The manor wasn't abandoned, it was remembered. At the end of the west corridor stood the study. The door opened without resistance, but the air inside was heavy, not stale, alive in its stillness, like breath waiting to be taken. The desk was large and dark, its surface bare save for a single closed book and a brass lamp. Beneath it, carved into the shadowed wood, sat the drawer. It had no keyhole, no handle, just a presence, just a place. Michael didn't touch it, not yet. Behind him, the door didn't latch. It stayed slightly ajar, as if to remind him that nothing in the house was truly closed, that some things wanted to be seen, eventually, not forced open, just waited on. He stepped back from the desk, letting his eyes wander to the shelves, lined with books whose spines curled like leaves in the rain. Some doors stay open because they're meant to be. Some drawers stay shut because something inside is still deciding. Don't open the drawer in the study. Her words returned, not in alarm, but like a line from a lullaby you didn't realize you remembered. They didn't say danger, they didn't say curse, they said not yet. Michael turned away, leaving the room as it was. The drawer remained untouched, but it was not forgotten, not by him, not by the house, not by the quiet thing waiting inside. Michael walked the corridor as one might move through memory, boots silent on a rug woven with vines and time. The walls rose high on either side, lined with portraits too aged to be proud, yet too alive to be forgotten. He paused beneath one frame where a boy stared out with the same crooked brow as the man 5 portraits down. Dust veiled their shoulders like soft snowfall, but the eyes remained sharp, as though watching kindly, not accusingly, as though they had waited too long to turn away now. The silence here wasn't emptiness, it was attention. The library greeted him with a breath, not a human sound, something older. Air shifting over the spines of books wrapped in velvet dusk, and the faintest scent of lemon oil. Michael let his hand brush across the shelves, fingertips dancing across titles that curled with age. Botany of Lost Gardens, Letters to a Girl Who Never Wrote Back, Moorland Psalms for Sleepwalkers. There were places here where cobwebs hung like lace, undisturbed, and yet something in the room had stirred when he entered. Like a page about to be turned, he paused in a doorway, still and listening. There was a quiet here that felt less like absence, more like presence. It didn't press in, it simply knew. He had moved to this sleepy town to escape the howling noise of his grief. Late sirens, hollow holidays, the sound his wife's slippers never made again on their kitchen floor. But this quiet, this was different. This quiet didn't threaten to swallow. It offered room to sit with what could not be said. Michael closed his eyes just for a moment, and the stillness settled in beside him, companionably. Later in the kitchen, the teacups made no sound as Mrs. Ellery poured. She spoke in fragments, like autumn leaves blown against a doorstep, soft, never hurried. Mr. Julian was, well, he didn't care for letters or clocks, but he knew every bird by name. Her hands moved slowly as she wiped the rim of her own cup. He'd hummed to the radiators when they groaned, said they sounded lonely. She looked up only once, eyes silvered by memory. That drawer in the study, the one you saw. Michael nodded. He never opened it, not once. I used to dust it, always locked, always warm. She didn't elaborate on why. That was the most haunting part. He'd sit beside it sometimes, she continued, like you would beside a fireplace, like it gave off a kind of heat, not light. Michael said nothing. Some silences feel sacred. People said he had treasure in there, gold ledgers, old love letters, but he said it held something deeper, a pause, longer than before, or maybe he just couldn't bear to let go of it. She didn't press the point, just folded her napkin and stared at the steam rising from her tea. Outside the rain had stopped, but water still ran in quiet streams down the roof, like time refusing to hurry. Michael returned to the study just before dusk, the light thin and golden. The drawer, still unopened, greeted him like a name he'd forgotten to carry for too long. He stood quietly, hands in his coat pockets, and stared at the place where the wood grain rippled gently over the front of the desk. He didn't touch it, didn't kneel, but a strange ache moved through him, the kind that had no sharpness, only depth, as if this place had lost someone too, as if grief had once lived here, tucked into corners, still writing its name beneath the floorboards. The room carried a scent he hadn't noticed before, not the paper or cedar or beeswax polish. No, this was something fainter, like the sleeve of a coat worn in another life, like letters pressed with rose petals. He moved to the window, cracked just slightly. The air outside smelled of rain and moss and wood smoke, and yet something lingered behind him, not ghostly, not heavy, just there, like a memory that had settled into the bones of the room. He did not speak aloud, but he thought of her. Michael sat in the chair Julian had once used. It creaked softly under his weight, but held. The drawer waited beside him, silent, still locked, but it no longer felt like a secret. It felt like a story that was waiting to be told slowly, kindly, and at the right time. He placed his palm on the surface above it, not to open, just to acknowledge. And in that moment, something changed in the air, not colder, not louder, only deeper, as though the room had exhaled, or the past had gently folded its hands and agreed to wait a little longer. Michael stayed there for a while, listening, breathing, not yet ready to leave, and no longer needing to. Michael noticed it on the windowsill, the old watch, tarnished, its strap cracked, its glass fogged faintly with time, and yet it ticked, not loudly, not insistently, just a quiet rhythm, as if marking not time, but waiting. He crouched beside it, frowning lightly. Its hands had moved since the morning, only a few minutes perhaps, but enough to say someone or something had turned the crown, wounded even. He picked it up. It was warm. He held it a while longer than he meant to. Later, walking past the long hallway lined with faded wallpaper and candle sconces, he paused. A hum drifted toward him. Not music, not quite sound. It was as if the walls remembered a tune that someone used to sing, low and quiet, like one might murmur to soothe a sleeping child. He tilted his head, listening. There were no radios in the house, no phones, but the air vibrated gently with something familiar, not eerie, almost tender, like being called in from a distant room. He did not follow it yet, but something in him had already turned toward the study. The hearth had gone cold by evening, but he knelt there anyway, drawn by what? The dust had shifted near the base, a faint smudge in the ash, like a finger had once dragged through the soot and pointed inward. He reached into the shadows beneath the bricks and felt the cool metal of a tin, not fancy, just one of those old floral tea tins, the kind meant to rattle when shaken. This one didn't. It was heavy, silent. He opened it, and the faint scent of rosemary rose like a whisper. There inside, a small brass key, green slightly with age, not hidden, only resting, as if it had been waiting, not for someone, for him.